think we're live. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Download with Joe. I'm Lewis, founder of LMC, a talent solutions business dedicated to climate technology. As always, here with Joe. Joe, how's things?
Yeah, things are good. Things are good. I would have worn I was telling you earlier, I would have worn my Nexus shirt last week after the great event, but it was in the wash. But yeah, I guess announced this morning that they're doing a 2025 event, which is great to see. Um,
Yep, that's gonna be fun. I imagine in Denver as well. So looking forward to
yeah,
that.
I Denver's not a really common place to have conferences, at least within our ecosystem. In some ways, having a city that is known, Blueprint is always in Vegas, Sierra Tech always in New York, but Denver, I think, is pretty easy to get to for everyone. I mean, I find it easy to get everywhere, so that also is a convenient aspect of things. So
Well, you live in Boulder, so it's bound to be easier for you.
yeah, oh, and point taken, right? It's easy to get to a conference, but at the same time, you know, being able to travel somewhere and being kind of I didn't get a hotel obviously because it was 10 miles away, but like sometimes having a hotel at the conference site, you run into people more frequently. It's like going to the gym in the morning, run into somebody, oh hey, let's talk. Didn't have any of those experiences, me personally, because I wasn't going to get a hotel room 10 miles away. So there's pros and cons, but yeah, it's a nice place to not have to travel away from, especially in the fall when there's a lot of events on the calendar.
Yep. No, there is. Cretex coming up, so that should be a good one. Um,
Yeah.
so today we're going to be talking through some of the latest funding rounds. It seems like it's been a pretty busy month since we last did this particular theme. There's a few that
Yeah.
we want to talk through and just go into some more detail on. And
Yeah.
I think, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've got a new, or your first edition of the bi-weekly newsletter is going to be released next week. So we may see some
Yeah.
new ones on there as well.
So we published last week, so about a week and a half ago, 10 days ago. And so what we're doing, we're splitting the newsletter. So same content, same format, but instead of having everything in one issue a month, we've subdivided in every 2 weeks. So what we did a week and a half ago, M&A, partnerships announced, and then kind of we started this focus on what are the large OEMs saying publicly about technology, connected services, anything relevant. So that's in one issue. And then coming this Sunday evening, the issue will be financings, new funds that are formed, right? So like new venture funds, new private equity firms that are funds from the firms that are formed, and then product launches. So we're doing all that. And there's actually a lot to report. Some of that is, at this point, it'll be 3 or 4 weeks old, but moving forward, every 2 weeks over the past month, you'll get a newsletter. So that's the new format. And I would say not a lot of M&A in that issue last week, some partnerships, a lot of product launches, a lot of financings as well. So it'll be a pretty big episode or issue this Sunday.
Nice. Looking forward to that, as always. I'm sure there'll be a little bit more data in that, but like from your perspective, just before we get into some of these deals,
Sure.
what's your thoughts on the landscape right now in terms of like deal size, the amount of deals? Is
Yeah.
the and there's different companies we're going to be speaking about, different technologies, slightly different
Yeah.
markets within this space.
Yeah.
But are we in a healthy
So
position?
Yeah, I think so. Couple of top topics. So if you look at like overall funding for prop tech, overall funding for climate tech. Now, climate tech is a very big category. It includes a lot of things, but there's usually a built environment, sometimes built environment versus buildings category. Both of them are down. Prop tech was down, I think, in early 2023 compared to 22. And there's data even, I was sharing some data, I think, in the last week newsletter. So that's down, but it's not really going down more, right? So you've kind of had that correction, if you will. On the climate tech side, there has been a little bit of a reduction in overall funding, but that was later, right? So like if you looked early 2023, climate tech doing great, prop tech starting to correct a little bit. But both now have corrected a little bit. That's typically overall dollars, right? So not so much deals. There are some studies or reports that talk about deals. The other big trend, there's a lot more small deals than big deals, right? So a lot of early stage companies seed, maybe even pre-seed, Series A, they're getting funded. And I can tell you just anecdotally, if you go to the past like year of newsletter issues, most of the rounds being announced that we're reporting on are in the, I don't know, 5, 10, maybe 15 million, but even that is kind of a big early stage round. And obviously, if you add that up and you compare that to one company that has raised $50 million, you have 3 to 10 rounds that have to get to that same number. So that's part of the reason that those numbers have gone down. That's also exactly what's happening across the broader tech industry, right? A lot of funding is going to early stage companies, not late stage companies. I've also heard anecdotally some of the later stage companies in our market, they just still have a lot of their money from their last round. So they don't necessarily need to raise more, if you will.
Okay, that's good. So there's not a lot of company, or there's less companies than I thought that may have just spent it all and desperately trying to find that next raise.
Yeah, there's probably some of that going on. But at the same time, if you've raised $100 million, you're a big prop tech company. I mean, you can reduce staff. You can, when people leave, just not backfill the roles. There's a lot you can do. That's just a lot of money. And I know when I was at my last company, we had, I think, a B round. This is 8-10 years ago of like 18 upper teens. And, that could support a sizable company that could get a lot done for a long period of time. And if you really wanted to, get more nimble and extend that runway longer, like that's enough money that you should be able to do that.
In theory, you think?
In theory.
So we've got about 20 minutes. Let's get into this. So the first one, which I saw and we spoke about previously, is Nimble Energy. Just for context for the audience, how would you define the business? Because there's quite a few organizations in this market that do fairly similar things.
Yeah. So Nimble is interesting. One, it's a pre-seed round. They're based in North Carolina. They a lot of their funding is from North Carolina based. If you look at least across America, this might be the same case in Europe, maybe even in specific countries. But there are funds out there that say we will fund companies based in the southeast of America, right, or even more specifically like the Carolinas. But Nimble is focused on energy management software. They've done some work working with CMMS players, which is we've talked in all different ways how CMMS, energy management, there's a match there. But they're focused on what I would describe as the MUSH market. MUSH is municipal, university, school, and healthcare. Some people call it the HUGS market, which is hospital, university, government, and schools. But anyway, acronyms to describe public sector institutions. And what's interesting there is that they're not the only ones. They haven't come up with some innovation that no one else has seen. However, a lot of companies out there are focused on large commercial offices, commercial real estate, not so focused on a city, a school, a university. There are some exceptions, obviously, but that's their focus. And I think that's interesting because in some ways there's still a lot of older technology being used by those vendors or by those owners, and they might just not yet have kind of a glide path into modern technology. And that's where Nimble's really focused for now. I mean, they could be successful and expand beyond that.
And if I'm not mistaken, they raised, what was it, $3 or $4 million?
It was under 5. Yeah, it was a couple million, which still a small team. But again, that gets you, that keeps you moving. So
nice. And I read a couple of days ago, I think it was published on our website last month. One of the co-founders, Jeff, talking about some of the lessons they learned whilst raising pre-seed. So I'll check that out. And I'll put it in the show notes for anyone that wants to have a read in that.
Yeah, and Jeff, I've known Jeff for a while. We've worked at similar companies or the same companies at different times. But that was really interesting, right? Because especially this time of year or this time in the cycle, raising money in general is harder, to my points earlier. So yeah, that was a good post.
Nice. Now, when we was doing research on this, and there's been quite a few LinkedIn posts about this already, but a lot of the feedback that I've got is that this company is kind of like a sleeping leader, often under the radar. But we saw fairly recently that Placer have raised 75 million or another 75 million at a valuation of about 1.5 billion, which is crazy.
Yeah. So I
talk
think
us
they're in
through
the
that.
unicorn. They're a unicorn now, and I think what's interesting. So Placer does a lot of location intelligence data. They don't necessarily focus on data only in the building. It's kind of like you could almost say 10 years ago when people were talking about smart cities technology, they would be a good example of that, where we can monitor where people are, we can provide data, we can provide high level data. How is your city being used? So they do a lot more than what you would say like a space utilization company in a building does. Um, but it's interesting because there's just not a lot of companies in our market, generally prop tech, that have gotten to a $1 billion valuation. So
I think that's
yeah,
very fair. From your standpoint, we've talked about this a few times, but we they're in this space, right? But you won't call them a smart building software platform, or that's not what they have. They have applications like that, but we don't
yeah,
necessarily see those big rounds. But you often see them in slightly neighboring spaces.
yeah. And I think, and you are right. I don't know if that's because it's less crowded, so you can. I think one thing, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, and we were even talking kind of indirectly about this when we were prepping just earlier today, Lewis. But I think there's a lot of different stakeholders in our market that are looking for a leader, and I think it's very hard to find a leader in a lot of the traditional smart building categories, mostly because there's dozens of companies. They sound the same, they look the same, they have similar clients. You talk to the clients are all happy, right? So it's like, well, you're not at risk of losing your business because everyone we've talked to that uses your product really likes it. But then you also can look at the numbers and say, but you're not growing a lot. So I think if you go to like a Placer, it's probably easier for them to make a case we're the leader. Um, whereas it would be hard for me to say within more of the traditional in the building, smart building, operational technologies, who is the leader.
That yeah, I agree. I think we're
So
probably still too early to determine that.
I agree.
Um,
Yeah.
And then another one, again, this was a few weeks ago now, but and we also saw them. They were exhibiting, and I think someone was speaking there at NexusCon. But Butler raising $38 million in the Series B rounds,
Yeah.
um, which is great because I think when there was, from my perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but we saw loads of investment going into sensors or companies that have a
Yeah.
sensor piece of their technology back in 2020, 2021, probably
Yeah.
rife given COVID, but we haven't really seen a lot of investment, maybe because the market was saturated for a period of time. So um,
Yeah.
it looks like this is good news for that space.
Yeah. There have been, so it's interesting because back in the 2020, 19, 20, 21, in that frame, I definitely did some market studies on space utilization technology, and Butler fits into that category. Right? We have a sensor, we install it inside, and it monitors. Different. There's different technologies being used. There's different approaches, but you can count people. You can track is there movement. Enlighted, which is now part of Siemens, was probably the first company that did this. That must have been 10 plus years ago. And they said, well, within the smart lights we're deploying, we can put a sensor. But that was PIR, passive infrared. So it was just telling you there are people or not people. There was no counting. So you could say, oh, look, everyone's congregating in this conference room, not that conference room. Why? But you didn't know, is it a 3-person meeting in an 8-person conference room? And over years or over even weeks, you can say, well, there's always 3-person meetings in this 8-person conference room. Can we subdivide the conference room to 2 4-person conference rooms, and then we get twice as much space? Anyway, there was probably over exuberance around just a lot of companies. I've definitely, anecdotally talked to some firms that have said, "Oh, we're just shutting down." Not a lot, but there's definitely been a little consolidation there, and I think that has led some companies to say, "Hey, we have an opportunity to grow now because there's just less froth or less complexity in the market." At the same time, buyers are getting a little smarter. There are different types of technology. Some are camera based, that can be good, but at the same time, there can be privacy concerns. Some are not camera based. Some of them are battery operated. That's useful in that you don't need an electrician to run wire, because there are all kinds of cases in a building where you say, I want to monitor this space. And they say, there's no electricity right here. We need to run a wire, costs money. But batteries also require changing out batteries, right? So there's always been discussion. Oh, they say the battery lasts 2 years, but we found it only 6 months. So that becomes another task that the FM staff have to run. So there's all these pros and cons. My point being, I think a lot of buyers are getting a little smarter to, I need this solution to solve this use case. Sometimes hot desking, sometimes conference rooms, sometimes even other use cases. But I think it's a good sign. I mean, OccuSpace, which I know that team really well and have known them for a long time, they raised earlier in the year. So there are some companies raising money, different approaches, but even things like pricing, I think buyers are more attuned to what should this cost? What is a high price? What is a low price? I think the other thing I'll say about Butler, one, their lead investor was Foundry, which is based here in Boulder. Really strong record with hardware plus software, and that's really where this fits, right? You have a hardware device, it enables a software outcome or solution that enables an outcome. But they were talking a lot about healthcare, health monitoring, and I don't have any inside baseball here, but that obviously is a huge area. And there are other companies in this space that have said we're going to be able to monitor for health outcomes and health use cases. Contact.io, which raised a big round, I think 60 range earlier this year. They mention them. Also talks a lot about healthcare. So that's a big industry. That could be huge. One of the things driving that large number.
And I think raised. It was a while ago, but I remember a company called Zandicardia, and they pivoted slightly to be more medical and healthcare focused, doing.
They were the first.
Fairly similar things.
Yeah, Xandar with an X. So there's a lot here. I think it's a sign of a maturing market that some of these companies are saying we're really good in this type of building. 2, 3, 4 years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, a lot of these companies, I think they just say, hey, we can work with any building. And yeah, you probably can, but like if your sensor is twice as expensive as your peers, go where there's a higher value prop and you can build a better ROI, which is probably not the office. It's maybe a hospital. So yeah.
That's fair. Yeah, stay in your lane. I get it. Yeah. And then Axel Energy, not a company I've come across before, but listening, talk us through that one.
Yeah, this was interesting. So this was, I think they might be German, but they're definitely European based. Kind of a DER platform. So the company itself knew they raised a small round. Again, it was under 10. I think it was 9 million. There's a lot happening around the building and the building as an energy consuming asset or a system with assets inside. And then on the utility side, we have all this flexible load. Utilities are faced with this. Renewables mean during the day, energy is becoming cheaper because you have a lot of solar. Wind is a little more consistent. So historically, you had almost like 2 separate energy systems. I have a building, I'm paying for energy, but at the end of the day, I'm just turning things on, making people comfortable. The building is on, we have lights, or it's not because there's no one here. More and more, I'm seeing platforms come together, and even people have reached out to me and said, "Hey, can you help us map this out, or help us figure out? Like, we're on the side of the utility, we want to understand building systems, or we're on the side of the buildings, we want to understand the utility." So they describe themselves as a DER platform, distributed energy resources, DER platform. Demand flexibility is another term you can use. There's a few interchangeable terms, but more and more we're going to see that, and I think this is more notable not for this company in particular, but that being an interesting angle. You maybe in the past wanted to do one or the other because selling to a building or a portfolio is very different than selling to a utility. Different sales cycle, different process, different skill set for the salespeople themselves. Now we're starting to realize actually you need to do both, or there's a value in doing both. You don't have to do both. And this is a company that seems to be trying to sit in between. There are others. It's not like they're the first, but they just raised some money.
Yeah, and I think however you want to call it, DER, demand response, it's just such a big trend, and arguably in the top 5 biggest pain points for the space when it comes to grids. And it's not just Europe or US. It's right the way across.
Yeah, I mean, here there's been a big trend, which in some ways is a good thing, where the bill you pay. I mean, even we here in Colorado we've moved to time of use rates for residential. So time of use just means you pay a different amount depending on when you use the energy. And historically, the middle of the day is where you pay, where energy is the most expensive. Now, it breaks up between consumption charges, demand charges, but high level, you pay more for using energy. That's all been shifting to the evening because with a lot of solar, 12 p.m., noon, like that's when the sun is the brightest. 4 p.m., 5 p.m., 6 p.m., sun's going down. Still people are at work, coming home from work, cooking dinner. so on and so forth. Getting home and say, oh, my house is kind of cold in the winter. My house is really hot. I'm going to turn the thermostat. So that's happening. If it's happening for a residential home, it's definitely happening for the big building, be it hospital, office, shopping mall. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it's definitely a space that we're keeping close to. We've got a couple of clients within the demand response space right now. So looks like a 9 million as well for a seed round. Pretty strong as well, at least in my opinion.
It is everything. Like there's just like you talk about grade inflation. There's like round inflation as well.
You kind of need to create that.
So, but I would have said under 5 3 years ago, 2 years ago. That's a good seed round. I mean, pre-seed. I think Nimble's was a pre-seed round at 3, but I remember 10 years ago in our industry, 10 to 20 was a really healthy B, and now it seems like that would almost be considered an A round.
Yeah.
Companies that are focused on hardware, I know we're going to talk about one in a second, they probably need more capital just because they're building physical things. But there's a bit of inflation.
Got it. Well, let's jump into that because I feel like we may have spoken about this company before, and it's timely because we had McGee, founder and CEO of Carbonon. One of his partners were focused within the heat pump space, and Kaer Systems. They've developed a heat pump, and I think they've recently raised a seed round as well.
Yeah. So, and what they're doing specifically is a heat pump water heater. So, without getting really, really technical, but this is fun to talk about.
Here we go.
So notably, there's obviously traditional HVAC systems. There's heat pumps, and obviously there's different types of heat pumps. I mean, JCI, they're the first, maybe not the only. They make a heat pump chiller, right? Which basically heat pumps. The idea is one, they're reversible, so you can heat water, you can cool water, or you can heat the air, cool the air. They do this. One of the notable things, they have very low. The refrigerants themselves will boil at a very, very low temperature. So like you can pull heat in Colorado when it's 25 degrees outside. You can pull heat out of that 25 degree air because keep in mind, there's still heat in the air. There's just not a lot, right? If you go to space, there's no heat in the air, but that's freezing. So you can pull the heat out. It will actually boil the refrigerant. It will cause a phase change. And then you can actually use that to heat your house. So heat pumps are cool. That's why people like heat pumps more technically. However, there are ways to use this at different types of buildings. So like there's big companies out there, all the major HVAC companies, they have heat pump businesses, but there's a lot of innovation more generally where small companies are saying, we're going to build our own heat pump, like physical heat pump. Usually they go after residential. What Kayla is doing is they're doing that for water heating. There are also heat pump water heaters, kind of a mouthful. Typically, a water heater works one of two ways. You have a tank, you have probably a fossil fuel, it's boiling the tank, you insulate the tank, that gives you hot water for a shower, for anything else. Or you have kind of a tankless heater, which still usually uses a fossil fuel, but there's no tank, right? So it's on demand is another word, like it's heating the water immediately as you're taking a hot shower. A heat pump water heater has a tank, but it's using a heat pump type of technology to heat the water. So not a fossil fuel. It's pulling heat from the surrounding air and heating the water. So again, same idea, right? Like your air might be 70 degrees in your house. Very interesting technology. I think the connection with Watt Carbon, one, if you are deploying these as like an apartment complex, some of the credit, if you will, of reducing carbon, because there's absolutely a carbon reduction, you could sell that, if you will. I mean, sells maybe a kind of a very crude way of putting it, but you could that has value on the Watt Carbon marketplace, the Wheats marketplace. They did a project, which there's a great podcast. Actually, James from Nexus did this, where a company here in Boulder that electrifies homes, right? So heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, they were working with a large commercial real estate operator, I think in Canada, that said like, we can't reduce our carbon enough because there are some things in our building that, like, at the end of the day, we're not going to tell our tenants, hey, there's no lights anymore. But they basically bought credits from this company locally called Elephant Energy that was doing projects, that was funding some of those projects. And I think they do a lot of heat pump water heaters. A lot of other details on heat pump water heaters, probably not so relevant, but as you can tell, like it's fun to talk about this stuff as a guy who used to
from in UK, but more specifically like Northern Europe, there's district heating. I mean,
Yeah.
what's the difference there? Just
Yeah.
from your input.
So, yeah, great question. So, district heating, it's funny, a lot of universities, like down the street from us is the University of Colorado. They have a central plant. I'm assuming they have chillers in there. They definitely have boilers. And they're heating water for the entire central campus. Very common. I mean, I got a tour a couple years back of University of Nebraska on our way, same thing, right? Like you go and there's a big warehouse and it's almost like a mini power plant. There are, like the university I went to, they actually had a power plant. There was like piles of coal because it was Indiana. And they're making energy and then they're cooling their water and heating their water. District heating or district cooling. Singapore does a lot of district cooling because it's so hot there.
Yeah.
They have a central plant or a central physical location where they're heating the water, cooling the water. They probably have multiple chillers and multiple boilers, or both. And then they actually have pipes throughout the ground that are distributing the hot water, which then can heat air in the individual buildings through like air handling units. So district heating or district cooling does not specifically refer to a physical thing, like a type of physical equipment. You I suppose could do district cooling with heat pumps. You probably usually, as you are trying to heat or cool more space, you want to scale up and have bigger units, right? So like a bigger chiller, fewer bigger chillers versus a lot of smaller ones. Just as like rooftop units make sense for 5-8 tons of cooling capacity. A store might put 10 of them on the roof, like a Home Depot. But if you get to a university, they're probably not saying let's buy 10,000 rooftops. They're going to go for chillers. And the numbers, just the cost, it makes more sense. The flip side, like I don't need a chiller for my house, right? My house is a couple thousand square feet, so that's the kind of the side of it. But district heating and cooling, and in England and in other European countries, this makes a lot of sense. They just have in a block, couple blocks, there's no defined like it has to be a block, a city block or not. They are actually heating water centrally. That could be based on fossil fuels. That could be, geothermal is really common as you get to the Nordics, but they're pumping it under the ground. You have sewer lines, you have water lines, and you probably have supply and return hot water, at least hot water lines. I think when you get to Northern Europe, there's not a lot of air conditioning. But
no, there isn't a lot. But there's also not a lot of heat, especially in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. It's every once in a while, like I have family in England, right? And they're like southeast, and my uncle always texts us on WhatsApp. He's like, "Hey, it was 73 degrees today. It was so hot." It's like, oh, that's not that hot, but
no. When
it's all relative.
You're in Dallas and it's 120.
Yeah, I know. Maybe 80. 80 would be like a hot day for England. Yeah.
Yeah. I've just made a note because I think we could maybe do a guest episode there. Hopefully, other people have found it as interesting as what you and I have. Final one then, just before we wrap up. Clear Result, which is a really interesting thing to talk about because they've made a couple of moves there.
So Kohlberg and Company, big private equity firm, bought, I forget which private equity firm sold. A lot of private equity firms, generally their model is buy, build, improve a company over 5 or so years is a good frame. And then they want their money back. So there's a cycle to things. Clear Result is an interesting company. Probably has a lot of people watching this have heard of them. They generally sell services, consulting, expertise to utilities. And a lot of what they do is run energy efficiency programs, big and small. There's 4 or 5 big companies in the Clear Result bucket, like competitors to them. And they're a familiar name to me, just in that if you come across utilities, a lot of times the team that is both running energy efficiency programs, anything from we will do a home energy audit, we will do a ASHRAE level 2 audit of your large building, we will recommend changes, we will fund some of those changes. There's definitely companies that are watching this episode or will watch this episode and say, yeah, we work with Southern Cal Edison, in Southern California, but really the people running and administering the program are Clear Result or a company like a Clear Result. Yeah. So they were just sold. As this idea comes up of, demand flexibility, distributed energy resources, connecting the building and those systems with the utility, companies like Clear Result will be a piece there to provide expertise, research, and administration of actual programs, right? Like we have a program, we've tested it, we've validated it, we've gotten approval to take some money from our energy efficiency budget and go out and deploy. And that could be anything from variable speed drives on your rooftop unit to an audit of your building to deploying fault detection. I mean, I've heard all of these, and in some cases, Clear Result is the party that's making it happen, if you will.
Nice. Yeah, I always thought Clear Result and that type of business wouldn't necessarily be a PE roll up kind of business, but I think the more I researched them,
Yeah,
the smarter it looks, because you can
yeah,
argue that they're a truck based firm as well, and they obviously do. Arguably, they have
yeah,
more service lines than your typical
yeah.
mechanical based business.
Yes, and I don't know how much. I haven't followed this so closely. I don't know how much of a roll up dynamic was happening. I mean, Clear Result was already 5 years ago a pretty well known established brand. There's obviously growth inherently in the fact that more utilities are investing more in energy efficiency, and really that model at a high level. If you look at your bill in America, any type of customer, I look at my bill, big university looks at its bill. There's some money there going to energy efficiency, and that has different names. Different states have different ways of describing it, but that goes into kind of a pot or multiple pots, and then those are distributed back to actually drive energy efficiency. So 10 years ago, when LEDs were becoming really popular, you could go to a Home Depot and buy 4 LEDs for like $3, obviously subsidized, right? So, but the way that was deployed was, we're going to fund it as the utility, but we believe when you go into Home Depot, you're going to see, oh, the LEDs are the cheapest. I just want a light bulb, but that's the cheapest. I'll buy that. Oh, it uses less energy. It lasts longer. Oh, those are great. So that's one. But also, just you can get audits. Like, somebody will come to your building and audit your building. And sometimes it's free or very low cost. Or sometimes the model is you pay for it, but any recommendation they have, we will fund those recommendations, right? So tuning the building, retrofitting the building, recommissioning the building, we'll fund some of that. A lot of that comes from that pile or bucket of money, and it could be more than one bucket. There's just more of that happening. So that means Clear Result is a well-positioned company to go to new utilities and support them in that, and that drives growth. So
Got it. Okay, cool. Let's leave it there for now. I think that's all we've got time for. And like I said at the start of this episode, if you would like to get some more updates
yeah,
on funding, but then across a variety of other themes, then please subscribe to Joe's newsletters, or you can watch this back on LinkedIn or YouTube now. Final question, Joe. We're coming towards the end of the autumn conference season. Are you
yeah,
heading to any others over the next couple of months? Because there's a couple
yeah.
coming up.
Yeah, I am. I'm going to Greenbuild. Greenbuild this year is actually the same week. It's in Philly, but it's the same week as CRE Tech. So somebody's got to pick. So I'm going to Greenbuild 12th through the 14th. If you're going, would love to see you. Definitely have some time. Couple other events, might pop up, but kind of smaller events. That's the main one. Honestly, I've kind of been trying to pare back a little bit, just because between work and kid stuff and being busy, the fall, I wonder why.
Life.
If you're organizing a conference, like, the spring is actually a good time to have conferences, right? Like, there's not that much in the spring, but like March, April, May, before school's out, before summer, it's a good time for conferences.
Yeah, but they all just come into one, which is
Yeah.
good and bad.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again for everyone that's tuned
Yep.
in. If you're listening to this and have an interesting topic or story about your technology or your business, and think you could be a great guest, then please reach out to Joe and myself. We'll put our
Yeah.
details in the show notes, so you've got that, and I'll link you to Joe's newsletter. He's here, so unbiased, but it is arguably the best, if not the best, newsletter, which
Thanks.
encapsulates everything in this space. So next week, I think we may have a special guest. We need to confirm a few details, whether it's next week or
Yep.
the week after, but please tune into that. But Joe, thanks for a good episode, especially on my birthday.
Yeah. And happy birthday to you. I forgot we didn't even mention that up front, but
I
yeah, no,
forgot my
it's
badge.
always fun to do these. Time flies. Thanks, Lewis.
Yeah. All right. See you next week. Bye,
See
guys.
ya. Bye.